The girl went out for a walk with a friend and vanished without a trace. Dozens of police officers and concerned citizens joined the search, but they were unable to find her. Sometime later, very strange events began to unfold in this case. An unknown person started leaving messages for the police throughout the city, claiming involvement in the girl's disappearance. With each message, he provided clues that could lead the detectives to him. Yet despite all these hints, his true identity and the sad truth were only uncovered 30 years later. April Tinsley was born on March 18, 1980, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She was the eldest in her family, was part of the local church choir, and attended elementary school. In her free time, she enjoyed spending time with her friends, strolling around the streets, visiting each other, and generally having a good time. On Friday, that April 1st, 1988, when she was 8 years old, she came home from school early and planned to go for a walk as soon as possible. April had lunch and asked her mother for permission to go to her friend Nicole's house, which was 300 meters away from her own home. The mother allowed April to go as she had many times before. Nicole's house was just a few minutes' walk away, and their neighborhood was considered very safe. The mother told her daughter to call as soon as she arrived at her friend's house and gave her an umbrella, as it was nearly 3 o'clock and light rain was expected soon. A few minutes later, April should have called, but when the time came, she did not return or make the call. Her mother began to worry, thinking her daughter might have been caught in the rain, and called Nicole's house. Nicole's mother answered and told a very strange story. According to her, April and Nicole had gone to play at a nearby park. While they were there, it started to rain, and April realized she had left her umbrella at Nicole's house. April then told her friend she would go back to retrieve the umbrella and return home, as she had promised her mother before the rain started. Nicole decided to visit another friend, and the girls parted ways. However, Nicole's mother said that April never came to get the umbrella, even though she had left the park almost an hour earlier. Hearing this, April's mother became seriously concerned. She immediately told her husband that their daughter was missing, and they began searching for her. Neighbors joined the search after hearing about the disappearance, and together they scoured all the streets between Nicole's house and the playground, but to no avail. As a result, the parents decided to contact the police. Officers came to their home, took a photo and description, and then began their search. Within hours, dozens of neighbors joined them, eager to help the Tinsley family find their daughter. Despite their efforts, no clues were found. As night fell, the police began to suspect that it might be an abduction, as if April had gotten lost or encountered a problem returning home. She would likely have been found by now. However, it appeared that the girl had vanished without a trace. The next day, the search area was expanded, and even more volunteers and police officers were added. But they still couldn't find her. This continued for 3 days, until on April 4th, the police received a call from a man who was jogging along a road about 30 kilometers from the girl's home. While running along the fields, he noticed something unusual in the ditch. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a human body. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered it was April. She was wearing all her clothes except for one shoe. The officers didn't find any obvious injuries on her body, but they were almost 100% certain that she had been murdered. According to them, an unknown criminal had killed her elsewhere before transporting her body to this ditch and dumping it there. Nearby Bamay, the police also found an adult toy. though they weren't sure if it was related to the case. Later, they finally discovered April's second shoe on the other side of the road, a few hundred meters from her body. The forensic doctors concluded that the cause of death was strangulation, and that the victim had been subjected to violence. They also determined that her death had occurred at most 2 days before the body was found, which meant the killer had kept the girl alive for some time. The experts extracted biological material from the murderer, but at the time, there was no FBI database, and DNA analysis in criminology was still in its early stages. As a result, the detectives had to rely on other leads, which fortunately weren't long in coming. Following the discovery of the body, investigators reached out to the public through the media and received numerous tips, with 2 standing out as the most promising. A man called the police and said he had passed by the spot where the girl's body was found and saw an old blue van parked on the side of the road. Investigators suspected it might belong to the murderer, and that the witness had seen the moment when the criminal came to dump the girl's body in the ditch. The next clue proved to be even more valuable. A woman living along the route from the playground to Nicole's home told investigators that on April 1st, she had seen a girl resembling April from her window. According to the woman's testimony, as the girl was walking along the road, an old blue van approached her, and a few seconds later, it drove off with the girl. Due to her view being partially blocked by a car, the woman couldn't see exactly how the girl got into the van, but her statements still became the first solid lead for investigators. The woman also provided a description of the driver, a white man, around 30 years old, with dark brown hair. The police shared this description, along with details about the van, in the media, hoping someone would recognize him. Soon after, the FBI became involved in the case. Working together with the police, they investigated all men previously convicted of sex crimes in the area and sought out new leads. At one point, the investigators were told that the suspect's sketch resembled a man involved in various crimes who also had an interest in Satanism. They investigated this individual, but couldn't establish any connection to the case. However, he was arrested for another crime. The police continued to follow up on leads and investigate various people, but they weren't able to make any significant progress. This went on for several months, and eventually, the detectives hit a dead end. Interestingly, during their search for April's killer, the police uncovered several other crimes against children and arrested those responsible, but the person behind April's murder remained at large. For several years, there were no developments in the case, until everything suddenly changed in May of the 1990s. A teenager living 20 kilometers from where April's body had been found came across a message on his shed that shocked him. The message, apparently from the killer, claimed responsibility for April's murder and mentioned plans to kill others. The killer also asked whether the police had found April's second shoe. This detail immediately led detectives to believe that the writer was indeed April's murderer, and not someone playing a cruel joke. At the time, the information about April's second shoe, found hundreds of meters away from her body, had never been mentioned in the media, meaning only the murderer could have known this detail. Another interesting point was that the message had initially been written in pencil, then circled with a marker. This led investigators to believe that the criminal might have left the message months before it was discovered, and that it had gone unnoticed for some time. Perhaps this didn't sit well with the killer, who then decided to return and make the message more visible by using a marker. The police decided to release photos of the message, hoping that someone might recognize the handwriting. However, this led nowhere. A few months later, the people of Fort Wayne were shaken by the news that police had found the body of a 7-year-old girl on the other side of town. She had been assaulted, and the cause of death was strangulation. Given the clear similarities to April's case, police immediately suspected that the same individual was responsible for both murders. However, FBI profilers had a different opinion, believing these were two separate crimes. No progress was made in either case until 1995, when it was concluded that the second murder had been committed by a family friend of the victim, who had already passed away. This case was eventually closed, and it was definitively determined that it had no connection to April's murder. Detectives also hoped that the killer would leave them new messages. As the initial one had clearly suggested, he enjoyed mocking the police and feeling untouchable. But years went by, and no new notes were found. That remained the case until 2024, when suddenly the case took a new turn. A girl in Fort Wayne discovered a package in the basket of her bicycle containing a note. Horrified by its content, she immediately showed it to her parents, who called the police. The note read, "Hello, my dear. I've been watching your every move. I'm the one who kidnapped, assaulted, and killed the girl. I have a gift for you. You will be my next victim. If you don't tell the police, and I don't see this note on the local news tomorrow, I will destroy your house and kill everyone but you. You will be mine." The police had no doubt that the author of the note was indeed April's killer. Inside the package with the note, there was a used condom, which was immediately sent to the lab. By 2024, DNA analysis was already widely used, and experts had long since extracted the profile from the semen found on the victim's body. Now, the analysis showed that the biological material from the condom belonged to the same individual. But this person was not in the FBI database. The police reopened the investigation and soon received a report about another note. Another girl found a piece of paper with similar text. The criminal claimed to have killed April Tinsley and threatened to kill the girl. Inside the package with the note was another used condom containing DNA from the same man. In the following months, the police received 2 more reports about similar notes found by other girls. This time, the criminal had attached photos of his genitalia, taken with an instant camera. Investigators tried to find clues in these images that might help identify the criminal. However, all they could notice was green-patterned bedding on the killer's bed. They attempted to locate stores that sold similar sets, but this led nowhere. Thus, in just a few months, the criminal left 4 notes, but after that, he went silent again for years. In 2029, the FBI released a profile of the killer, including known physical characteristics from witnesses. They hoped to receive new leads, but nothing came of it, and the case remained unsolved for years. For the authorities, this case remained a top priority for several reasons. First and foremost, they wanted justice and to punish the man who had killed April. Secondly, the criminal openly mocked the police with his messages and seemed to believe he would never be caught. He was so confident that he literally left his DNA for the detectives, and now they had multiple biological samples. However, after all these years, April's killer had never been entered into the FBI database, which meant he had never been arrested for serious crimes and continued to live freely. In 2012, April's case was featured on a popular TV show dedicated to unsolved crimes, leading to a new wave of tips. But these too led to dead ends. In 2015, The decision was made to enlist the help of a behavioral profiling company, which had just begun offering an innovative service to law enforcement agencies. Experts created presumptive portraits of the DNA holders from their samples, and this new approach had already helped solve several cases. Investigators reached out to this company, and Perrin provided them with a portrait of the suspect. It was published online and broadcasted in the media. Detectives hoped that someone would recognize this person, but luck was not on their side. They received no new leads. However, the police did not give up. A few years later, in 2018, they once again turned to Perrin, but this time to use an innovative approach called genetic genealogy. The principle behind genetic genealogy is that experts take a DNA sample and search public genetic databases for any relatives of the DNA holder, even distant ones. Typically, they find several thousand people, then study their family trees and try to identify someone who matches the criminal's criteria, such as gender, age, location at the time of the crime, and so on. The unique aspect of this method is that the DNA holder doesn't need to be in any database. They can be found through a long lineage of relatives. Detectives sent the killer's DNA sample to Perrin and waited. The process of finding relatives and studying their genealogy takes many months, as experts must sift through enormous amounts of data. But finally, they informed the detectives that they had traced the DNA holder's genealogy to two brothers living in Fort Wayne. The next step for the police was to determine if one of the brothers was the murderer. They began monitoring both men and collected their discarded trash, from which experts were able to extract DNA samples. Shortly after, the experts called the detectives with the long-awaited news. 30 years after the murder, they had obtained a perfect match. The semen found on the victim's body and in the condoms matched the DNA of one of the brothers, 59-year-old John Miller. He lived in a small town called Rebel, near the very spot where April's body had been found. At the time of the murder, he was 29 years old and living in the same trailer. Now the police needed to obtain a direct DNA sample from Miller and interrogate him. They went to his trailer and told him they wanted to ask him a few questions. At the police station, Miller asked what they were specifically interested in, and one of the officers responded by asking him to guess, so Miller looked at them and said it was him. The detectives took him to the station for interrogation according to proper procedures. During the ride, the man chatted with them about random topics and appeared quite relaxed. Once interrogated, he didn't deny anything and confessed to abducting and killing April. According to Miller, that day, he deliberately went to Fort Wayne, driving through the streets in search of a girl to kidnap. When he saw April on an empty street, he stopped and told her to get into his car. He claimed April silently complied, which seemed odd to the detective. However, the witness hadn't heard any screams or seen signs of a struggle, so the police didn't rule out the possibility that the criminal had somehow convinced April to willingly get into the car. After that, he took her to his trailer, assaulted, and killed her. Then he put the body in his pickup truck, drove to the fields, and threw it into a ditch. He admitted that the adult toy found at the scene belonged to him. 6 months after his arrest, as the trial began, Miller, on the advice of his lawyer, pleaded not guilty. To avoid dragging out the trial, he was offered a deal. Initially, the prosecutor wanted to seek the death penalty, but if Miller pleaded guilty, it would be replaced by a prison sentence. Considering that death penalty executions in the U.S. typically take many years to carry out, this decision made sense. In either case, Miller would spend many years in prison, and it wasn't certain that the death sentence would even be executed before he died naturally. In the end, Miller accepted the deal pleaded guilty before the judge, and was sentenced to 80 years in prison, with the possibility of parole when he turns 99 years old. April's mother was present during the sentencing and was upset that the criminal didn't receive the death penalty. However, given his age, it is unlikely that he will ever be released from prison. April's father couldn't attend the trial due to health issues, but he thanked the investigators for their work and for finally finding his daughter's murderer. The detectives who worked on the case were surprised that for some reason, the maniac seemed to want to be caught. He attracted attention and taunted the detectives, risking capture by the police. Even assuming he didn't know how far scientists had advanced in DNA work, leaving samples behind was very risky. First, he could have been sent to prison for another crime, and his DNA would have been added to the database, where it would immediately link him to April's case. Second, Miller could have been easily identified by witnesses by leaving notes, and he had been extremely lucky each time. All of this led investigators to believe that he was at least ready to be discovered, if not outright wanting it.